Hello everyone, welcome back to Luminate. This week's segment is really me thinking about what do human beings really want? I know, most of the time I don't know what I want, but most of the time we know what we think we know what we want. For example, we want a good relationship, or we want a good career, we want money, we want success, all those sort of worldly things that we desire. But what's underlying all those human needs and desires and ambitions? And there's actually a few ways to look at it, and a lot of psychologists and philosophers have thought about these things and came up with really interesting answers. So let's start with social psychology, and there are a few theories or explanations and categorizations of human needs. And the most popular one, I'm sure a lot of you have heard about it, is called Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of needs, where he proposes that humans have this hierarchy of needs starting from the physiological needs like food and water, through to, at the top of this pyramid of needs, self-actualization, where a human reaches the full potential. And somewhere in the middle are the usual, self-esteem, belonging, and things like that, respect. And I think the key thing to remember is that for him, there is this definitive hierarchy, and that in order to get to the state where you would start to think about needing self-actualization, or, what some might even think of as spiritual needs, you first have to fulfill your physiological needs. And in a way, it does make sense, because when you're really hungry or when you really are thirsty, it's not like you can really think about your spiritual and self-actualization needs, right? So at first it makes sense, but does it? There's one other social psychology theory by Clayton Alderfer. And in there is the ERG theory. And basically ERG stands for the three categories of the human needs. And that is E for existence, R for relatedness, and G for growth, where existence is what you might equate to the physiological needs in Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And R refers to the relatedness, which is social, external needs. Like, if you need a relationship, you need a sense of belonging, you want respect, you want, like fame or something like that. And then there's growth, which is more internal and is probably more related to the self-actualization top of the pyramid under Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So I thought those are the two theories that are interesting, and it's interesting that Alderfer expanded on it by saying that it's not necessarily a hierarchy, and that all these needs are continuous in one's life. And sometimes you might have a situation where your existential or rather existence needs are more important, or at least are the focus of your main goals. But then again, when you think about it, when someone is struggling, or when someone isn't happy, or when someone feels lost, sometimes being able to self-actualize, or being able to get to the point of self-actualization, might actually be the answer to manifesting those physiological needs. So I just, thought like, well, that's interesting, because if you think about it, maybe the pyramid itself shouldn't be a pyramid where it starts from the physiological needs and ends at the top of the pyramid. Actually, maybe the self-actualization or the spiritual part of those needs should actually run all the way in fulfilling those basic needs. And when we go to the more not extreme, but more kind of like spiritual and slightly more not really scientifically explained reasoning behind this, is when you think about it, they say that when you're completely in the flow and you're completely following your highest version or your full potential, all your needs get taken care of, everything. And it doesn't make sense, right? Like, it just doesn't make sense. But I find it interesting because if it's really all in the mind, if it's really all about your own internal growth that matters and everything else will be taken care of, how does that even work? But in order to understand that, we have to get outside of reality. We have to get outside of, like an existence that is based on cause and effect, and perhaps be the cause and not the effect of things that are happening in your life. And one interesting social psychology theory is that of self-determination by Richard Ryan and Edward Deci. And what it's basically saying is that it's talking about motivations behind the human behaviors, and that it can be categorized, or rather like summarized, into three things. And that's number one, competence, or the need to master something, the need to know everything about something. And then there's also relatedness. And relatedness is, the need to be cared for and care for others. So it's more of like a community need. And then there's autonomy, which is the need to feel in control. So if you think about these three motivations and you relate that to both Alderfer's and Maslow's theories, you can see that, at least in the top part, in the self-actualization part of Maslow, and in the growth need in Alderfer's theory, that all of those three things do need to be integrated into self-actualization. And when you think about what they all sound like, they all kind of sound like a spiritual level need. And when I say spiritual, I don't mean, go to a Christian church or to a Buddhist temple or anything like that. It's really more beyond your daily material needs being met. It's really more about just the experience of being human and what that entails. What do you really need as a human being other than having your physiological needs met? In the realm of science, they explain human needs in terms of things like evolution, as well as survival mechanisms, as well as, the reward system in the brain. For example, there's this triune theory of the brain, which is to do with how we evolved as Homo sapiens, where we started off with a reptilian brain, which is primarily to do with our instincts. And then we also have the limbic system, which is to do with our emotions. And then we have the neocortex, which is more advanced thinking. And for example, our prefrontal lobe developed, and it's what separates us from animals. And it's what allows us to simulate thought, to simulate scenarios in our head. It's like our imagination. So in a way, you can relate that to, say, the reptilian brain is all about instinct, safety, food, water, and all of these basic bodily needs. And then the emotions, the limbic system, the limbic part of the brain, is to do with our emotional needs and how we relate with other people. And the neocortex allows us to start thinking about self-actualization. And underpinning all this is in neurobiology is the idea of the dopamine reward system, which is primarily a neurotransmitter that mediates the pleasure-seeking behavior of human beings, and basically gives us the motivation to do things, right? And it goes in a range from needing food or eating food, which is the basic need, through to more self-actualized activities that give us that dopamine hit. We can even almost fake it, right? Like when people are on drugs and are very high on drugs, for example, like heroin, there is this feeling of complete, total satisfaction. It isn't necessarily, a food that you need to eat in order to feel satisfied, or a drink. It's actually more about just the feeling of complete and total satisfaction. I've never taken heroin, so I don't know. But it is that's, what that's doing is activating your dopamine reward system. So there is something in our neurobiology that also determines what motivates us and what needs we have, but they are all kind of chemically controlled. And lastly, there's evolutionary psychology, which is mainly focusing on, the basic human need for procreation. So it's like mate acquisition and mate retention and parenting and things like that. And all of that drives our human needs and desires. But in this case, I still find a lot of these scientific explanations lacking, because it only tells us about our biology and how it works, but it doesn't really tell us more about our transcendental self-actualization needs. Maybe dopamine might explain it, but beyond mate acquisition, beyond the evolutionary psychology explanation of human needs, why do people still feel unhappy? I think science only explains how we're motivated by the bottom part of the pyramid, the needs that need to be fulfilled, which are at the bottom part of the Maslow pyramid. So how do we get to self-actualization? Like, what is it? What's the explanation for it? And I don't really think that there is necessarily a theory or a scientific explanation for self-actualization, because it goes beyond the realm of what we know today, because it does go to the realm of the spiritual and not just the physical 3D world that we're living in. So let's zoom out and look at it from a philosophical perspective. And one of the most interesting theories I find is that of Søren Kierkegaard, who is a 19th century Danish philosopher and the founder of the idea of existentialism, which you've all heard. And existentialism is really closely related to self-actualization. When you start to question about your existence, who are you as a human being, you're actually getting into that realm of self-actualization and self-transcendence even. So, and in fact, one of his most famous theories, or rather concepts that he has developed, is this idea of a leap of faith. And in that, he says that true understanding and fulfillment can only come from a leap of faith, beyond scientific evidence, beyond rational thought, into the realm of faith, into the realm of the divine. And that's really connected to the realm of self-transcendence and spiritual peace. And he also further outlines life's way, which I interpret to be rather similar to the needs that we have as humans, in which he says that there are 3 levels of needs that we kind of fulfill as we go through life. Not necessarily in this order, although generally in this order. The first being the aesthetic needs, second being more like ethical needs, and the third one being religious needs. And in this case, religious isn't to do with necessarily just going to church. It's more like a spiritual need. And I find that, again, interesting, because I relate the aesthetic needs to the more basic human needs, like at least in the West today, entertainment, art and things like that, right? Although art arguably absolutely could be a spiritual experience. I know for a fact, because I experienced it myself. But he does state that at the end that there is that spiritual need that one needs to fulfill. And that's really the final stage of the human life, of the human experience. So tying all these together, all these social psychologists and scientists and philosophers, you start to see that the basic human need really is of a spiritual nature. But what is a spiritual nature? And most of them do agree that it is a journey of the self. It's a journey of self-discovery. It's knowing who you are, being aware of your thoughts, your actions being, if you make a mistake, do you reflect upon it? If you experience difficulties in life, how aware are you about yourself to understand and admit your part that you have played in creating the issues in your life? And that's really, really difficult, because a lot of the times there are external factors that do affect us. There are a lot of people around us that might upset us, situations in politics, at your job, with your spouse, with your family, with your friends, that seem external. But ultimately, a lot of these can be reflected upon, and that is a journey that you make yourself. You think about how you react and why you react the way you do, and that could be the way that allows you to solve the problem, or to at the very least give you peace. But actually, what I personally realize is that in order to even get to a state of self-actualization, you need to not have your needs met at the lower end of that pyramid. For example, when you are really struggling, when you couldn't pay your bills, you could barely put food on the table, or when, you've been isolated by everyone in your life, or you're experiencing extreme social trauma, that's when you start to question the most fundamental things in life, like what is the meaning of it all? When you are at the point where you are contemplating suicide, it's when you really break through to get to the point at the top of that Maslow's pyramid. And the interesting thing is, Maslow himself actually recognized this by later on adding self-transcendence above self-actualization. And it addresses the spiritual aspects of the human experience, and it points to an awareness and concern that goes beyond the individual. And when you, again, like following this thread of thought, it makes you wonder, like, you see so many people suffer out there, like things that you couldn't even imagine you'd ever go through, because you're probably living in a more privileged place where you have safety and you have your needs met, their social security. But, if you think about the people who don't have this, why does that even happen? Why do we as a collective of human beings allow that to happen? So it leaves me with a lot of questions, which I think I might have some opinion on, but I'd love to know more about what you think, because, what if spiritual needs is really something that we should prioritize? It should be the number one thing on our list. And everything we do while we're solving our physiological needs, our emotional needs, that we do it in a spiritual way. We use all the tools that we have in whatever beliefs that we have in that aspect in terms of spirituality, and use that to solve all our 3D physical reality problems. What if that's really the answer? And what if all the pain that we see in the world, all the lives of the people around us that we see that are so difficult, including our own, what if really the answer isn't so much a physical assistance, but rather assisting ourselves in our own journey into becoming the best version of ourselves? What if, we got it all wrong, that there is really something beyond, and we need to take that leap of faith in order to even get to the top of the pyramid, according to Maslow? So I think that's all, like, some for me. And thank you so much for watching. I do hope that you subscribe, and I really would love to interact with anyone who is watching this. Again, this is my second video, so I'm not used to this. It's just really for me to record all my thoughts about musings about life, and I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you very much.